So I want to talk about context adaptation and cognitive control. And this very much connects to what Sarah has been showing on Monday and also what Martin has been showing a bit as well. And I want to start a bit interactively, so it's, I guess, nice for the first session. So what I would like you to do is I'll show you a word on the screen, and I would ask you to say out loud the color of the font. So if you see a word like this, you would say red. If you see a word like this, you would say blue, so ignoring the meaning of the word. Yeah, just say it out loud. Ready? Okay. Nice. Yeah, it always works. So this is, who knows this effect? Okay, pretty much. Who doesn't know the effect? No one. Oh yeah, now you know it. So this is the Stroop task, and it has been around in psychology for almost 100 years, but it's very interesting. So one effect that you somewhat showed, I guess, first of all, is the main effect that you see here. So if the meaning of the word and the color of the letters don't match, that's the incongruent condition, then generally reaction times are longer, and also accuracies are lower, as we all noticed, I guess. So that was, people find that way harder to do. And the idea behind that is that you automatically read the word, and you automatically kind of process the meaning, and it interferes with the response that you want to give. So the task is to ignore the meaning of the word, but you can't really do it because it's an automatic process. The interaction effect that you can see here, you would probably have to do the experiment a bit longer, but maybe you also notice it somewhat, is that if you have a lot of congruent trials and then you get an incongruent trial, then the difference in reaction time is a lot larger than if you have a lot of incongruent trials. And so basically that was the first time you saw the incongruent word, that if people usually find that harder because they're kind of, you could say they're used to the congruent words. So right in the beginning there were two congruent words, and then when the first incongruent word came along, there was possibly harder for you to give an answer to. And when you continuously see incongruent words, then you at some point adapt to that. And I think this effect, even though it's super old, is very interesting because it is a really nice way of showing different kinds of how we humans adapt to our environment. And there's basically three central types of adaptation that this effect shows. So first of all, cognitive control. So that means we adapt our behavior or processing based on the current goal or the current task. And that was basically you trying to ignore the meaning of the word and trying to focus on the color of the word. So that is what you need cognitive control for. Then meta control is if you adjust to the current context. So in this specific case, that was basically if you've just seen a lot of incongruent words or a lot of congruent words. So going back to this here, because we're talking about context, basically there in this case or in these experiments, usually there's two different contexts. One where the stimuli are mostly congruent and one where the stimuli are mostly incongruent. And what this effect specifically shows is that people can adapt to the context. Right? So this is the context adaptation. And the third type of adaptation that is kind of implicit or assumed is that we at some point in our lives have learned this automatic process. So we kind of, before actually doing the experiment, we have already adapted to our environment because we learn that it usually makes sense to read the words that we see and automatically process them. And the question that I'm interested in is how do we choose among these different types of adaptation? So basically, yeah, should we learn a different stimulus response association? So basically, should we learn whether to read the word or not, or should we adapt which context we're currently in, or should we use cognitive control to adapt to the current situation? And for this, I'm using the same formalism, as I already said, that was introduced by Sarah on Monday. And I briefly want to show an example of this, how this could work. So this is a graphical model that's similar to the one that we saw on Monday. But this allows me to do actual inference in this. And so in this specific example, I want to show how we adapt through cognitive control. So the idea is that you see a particular stimulus. So let's say you saw the word red in green letters. So this is basically the perceptual process. And in the beginning, you don't know how to respond to it. And the idea is that you can describe cognitive control by conditioning this model on the outcome that you want to achieve. So let's say you want to achieve a certain reward. And if we condition this model on this outcome, it just by Bayesian inference automatically tells you what response to give. So this is basically my definition of cognitive control. So adapting your information processing based on the outcome that you want to achieve. Now I can also show how learning or automatic processing plays into this. So the idea is that what we actually learn is a stimulus-response association. So basically this arrow here, that if we see a particular stimulus, or if we see the word, that automatically gives us a response tendency, or it gives us an idea about what response we should give. So if I do exactly the same thing again, in this case, I assume that in this model, that this model has already learned that if it sees the word red, usually it should respond with something like red. Right? So we automatically have a bit of an idea how we should respond. And now we can still use cognitive control, but now we have to override this, this behavioral prior, you could say. And that means that, first of all, the inference becomes more complex because we were further away from our prior. And we also end up at a point where we're less accurate. So for instance, if I compare this to a congruent trial, we're like almost 98% sure what response to give. So there's like a 2% error rate. And if we're in an incongruent trial, we have like a 7% error rate, so much larger, according to this model, even though this is just for illustrative purposes. All right. Oh, I have 2 minutes left, really. Nice. Okay, I'll go through this illustration. And, well, this is also kind of the most important point, I guess. The idea here is that I introduce, and we saw this on Monday too, I introduce an abstract latent state, a context, that basically allows me to learn different stimulus-response associations. So the idea here is that I have one automatic context where I have a very strong stimulus-response association, and a non-automatic context where I basically have no stimulus-response association. And to illustrate this, let's go through the same example again. If I don't know what context I'm currently in, there's like a small response tendency. If I think that I'm in the automatic context, I have a stronger response tendency, initial response tendency. And if I think I'm in the non-automatic context, I have no initial response tendency. So that basically allows me to, let's say that I have learned to respond to words that I read automatically, but I can kind of switch that on and off, right? So this is really what the context does. And the interesting thing is that if I now condition this model on reward, it tells me, first of all, what response I should give, but it also automatically gives me some information about what context I'm currently in. So it automatically tells me from interacting basically with the environment or through processing the stimulus in the first place, that I'm in a non-automatic context, because here this was an incongruent trial, so what I've learned previously is not valid at the moment. Whereas if I have a congruent trial, that would automatically give me some evidence that I'm in the automatic context. And the whole idea of this project, feel free to talk to me afterwards, is that this probabilistic formalization in this graphical model allows to basically make an information-theoretic point of when to use which type of adaptation. And very briefly, let me show this in large. You can kind of see, okay, from an information-theoretic point of view, how much context adaptation, this is the meta control, and how much learning should I ideally use. And it turns out that if you do this really rationally from an information-theoretic point of view, you get out the effect that you also see in humans. So basically the orange lines is the model with the context, and that's the only one that really reproduces the human effect. Thank you for your attention.